another agenda around a push for global climate reparations. Real important stuff. Now, look, there is a large-scale push in the United States for new policies of universal basic income. Some of these are being proposed as solutions to climate change. Other forms of this are being proposed as a solution to a future where artificial intelligence will presumably render many American jobs just plain old obsolete. But either way, whether it's one way or the other, this new form of wealth redistribution, global welfare, could usher in a program not just for nationwide welfare, but for global welfare maintained by the hardworking people of every nation on earth. Now, look, first off, on the climate change front, there are actually huge amounts of money right now being pledged and collected, type of global repayment in the system for what are called reparations to third world countries. Let me show you some of this. Slay News says that when the United Nations Climate Summit drew to its close in mid-December, globalist governments around the world were pledging billions of dollars in taxpayer money to fight the so-called climate crisis. Democrat President Joe Biden's administration joined other Western governments in pledging billions for climate reparations and a, quote, green climate fund. It notes that right at the start, Western governments in Japan pledged large sums for what is being portrayed as climate reparations, dubbed the Loss and Damages Fund by the United Nations and its members. The narrative behind it holds that since freer Western people developed first, they have put more CO2 into the atmosphere and therefore must pay third world governments who misrule poverty-stricken populations for the alleged harm caused. In other words, it's a global welfare system. Western countries, the United States, most of Europe, even Japan, because they say that we're responsible for CO2 emissions, is paying reparations. All these countries are paying reparations to many third world governments. Now, the irony with part of this is that a lot of these third world countries create like a ridiculous amount of pollution, but that's a whole other issue. This article notes that on the first day of the 28th conference of the parties, that's COP28, the big climate change summit they had in Dubai, it notes the governments began making pledges on behalf of the taxpayers. And so if you're wondering, well, my government didn't talk about this, I didn't hear anything about it. Well, they probably did, but they just didn't tell you that clearly. It notes that the German government pledged $100 million. Japanese authorities promised to hand over $10 million just as a start. The Biden administration pledged $17.5 million to this global reparations fund. It notes that the unelected leaders of the European Union, the EU, vowed to offer 200 million euros in taxpayer money. It notes that third world regimes are demanding at least $100 billion every single year just for this fund alone. And I would assume that based on the fact they give a lot of these countries a lot of money already, it's probably not going to go to the average citizen. Just a hunch, given how these things have been used in the past, but it notes that they claim the cash is needed for what they call climate justice, because we've apparently committed injustices against them just by existing in the world and breathing out CO2. It notes the fund, which will be housed at the World Bank, notably, for now, as policymakers try to find a permanent home for it, is actually separate from another one, which is the infamous Green Climate Slush Fund. It notes that fund, which has been in existence for years, is being used to bribe third world governments into keeping their people in poverty by prohibiting abundant energy and restricting resource development. It notes that Biden and Obama have funneled billions, with a B, of U.S. taxpayer dollars into that one already in flagrant defiance of federal law. And you know what? We can see what good it's done for those countries. Not a whole lot, especially because they're fleeing in vast numbers and deciding to just go collect those reparations in person. And they're, of course, coming to the United States through our open border, and they're, of course, flooding into Europe also through the Open Borders program. So on this note, though, climate justice, reparations, global payments for alleged damages caused by our lifestyles and us driving cars and taking up the world's energy. Although again, all those countries do the same, although worse in terms of pollution. This is the big narrative. That being said, though, this is not just for a program of global reparations and global free handouts and essentially a global welfare state being propped up by first world countries, the United States, Europe, Japan, but also something being proposed tying into a global welfare system, including in Western countries. And keep in mind that a lot of Western countries, the United States and others, are being flooded by individuals from a lot of these third world countries under the narrative of climate change, and they're fleeing climate change, and they're seeking amnesty because, apparently climate change is harming. That's the big narrative, right? This is being framed in terms of race and reparations and the whole 9 yards. Keep in mind that tied in with all of this, globally, no matter where you are, is a new concept of global social welfare. What they're proposing is a globalist system of wealth redistribution. It's not just the bourgeoisie and the proletariat of the communist movement in one country or other. This is a global system where, again, the bourgeoisie are going to be people in a certain country, and they're going to be given communism people in other countries to create universal equity. But they're also talking about the idea of universal basic income. Every single person gets a paycheck every single month from the government, and if you choose to work, you're going to be the one paying into that fund. If you choose not to work, well, all power to you. You can sit at home and do whatever you want. New York Post notes that Democratic presidential candidate Representative Dean Phillips broke with President Biden's views on reparations and universal basic income in an exclusive interview with the Post, revealing new details about his campaign platform. It notes that Phillips confirmed he would embrace paying reparations to African Americans for slavery and experiment with universal basic income. Both proposals associated with the left wing of the Democrat Party. In other words, this is more from the further left elements within the Democrat Party. It notes that Phillips also said he would be open to experimenting with universal basic income due to the onset of artificial intelligence, and said this: "I do believe a UBI pilot should be initiated." He said, "There have been some. I think it's time to do more, because we are going to lose millions of jobs to artificial intelligence, and right now we do not have any plan to address it." This is actually not just a far-left issue as it's being portrayed as. This is technically not just in terms of what's happening there. This is also something coming very much from the right. This is also coming from conservatives. It's coming from libertarians, surprisingly. And it's coming from a lot of the folks pushing kind of the big tech agendas. Because right now we're dealing with a situation possibly for the entire world where artificial intelligence is going to be taking away, interestingly, most of the creative jobs. And cleaning toilets and all that, but for the elites who typically write the Hollywood scripts and so on, or the artists, they're going to be out of work, is what they're proposing essentially.
Hi, I'm sociologist Paul Hollander, in his book Political Pilgrims, told the stories of many young intellectuals enamored with communism who traveled to the Soviet Union, Maoist China, and communist Cuba. While horrifying abuses were taking place, these young political pilgrims were shown none of it, and, upon their return to their countries, enthusiastically wrote books glorifying socialist policies. Communist ideology is an ideology of the devil, and as time has passed, people have seen increasingly clearly that everywhere communism goes, it is accompanied by violence, lies, war, famine, and dictatorship. The question is, why are there still so many people who wholeheartedly help the devil spread its lies, even becoming its obedient tools? In the United States, for example, people of different time periods were attracted to communism for different reasons. The very early members of the Communist Party USA were immigrants. Their economic status was low, and it was hard for them to blend into the community. They thus joined the party, mainly due to influences from their homelands, primarily Russia and Eastern European countries. After the Great Depression, the influence of Marxism in the West dramatically increased, and almost the entire intellectual class in the West began a leftward turn. Numerous intellectuals went to visit the Soviet Union, and after returning home, gave speeches and wrote books promoting communist ideology. Those involved included many influential thinkers, writers, artists, and reporters. The baby boomer generation entered college during the 1960s, growing up in post-war affluence, yet they were misled by communist-inflected ideologies into taking up other countercultural stances in the form of anti-war protests, feminism, and the like. The next generation of students was taught left-leaning material right out of their textbooks because their teachers were the tenured radicals. Thus, communism's long march through the institutions had finally succeeded, beginning a cycle intended to reproduce and maintain itself forever. In a book dedicated to exposing communism, Masters of Deceit, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, whose tenure ran 37 years, classified communist activists into 5 groups: open party members, underground party members, fellow travelers, opportunists, those who support the party for self-interest, and dupes. In reality, there are very few extremely evil and die-hard communist activists. It's much more the case that the majority of Communist Party members were simply taken in. American journalists John Silas Reed and Edgar Snow played major roles in promoting communist ideology around the world, with Reed's book 10 Days That Shook the World and Snow's Red Star Over China. Reed is one of the 3 Americans who was buried in the Kremlin Wall necropolis, meaning that he himself was a communist activist. His description of the October Revolution was not an objective reporting of the actual events, but carefully crafted political propaganda. Snow was a fellow traveler of communism. In 1936, the interview outline he provided to a CCP member included questions in a dozen areas, including diplomacy, defense against enemy invasion, views on unequal treaties, foreign investment, views on Nazis, National Socialists, and more. Later, Mao Zedong met Snow in a cave home in Shanbei, the northern portion of Shanxi province, to answer questions so that a favorable impression of the CCP could be created. The young and naive Snow was used as a tool by the treacherous CCP to broadcast its carefully crafted lies to the world. Yuri Bezmenov, a former KGB spy, recalled his experience of receiving foreign, quote, friends when he worked as a spy. Their schedule was partially arranged by the Foreign Intelligence Service of the Russian Federation. Their visit...
Criticism. The Park Service called for a more inclusive renovation. That instead features Native American culture. The Park Service then rescinded the decision, saying it had not been through a complete agency review. And we welcome historian Roger McGrath.
Well, I would like to investigate the National Park Service and see who was behind this, and they were going to do it. And they're trying to back off now and say, well, it was just a proposal that we hadn't thoroughly reviewed. No, it wasn't. They were going to do this until a hostile backlash. I heard they had something like 2,500 emails almost immediately opposed to removing the statue of William Penn. But this tells you something about the National Park Service, that it too has become a leftist institution, a woke institution. If it had been quiet, they would have just done it. It would have been a fait accompli. Just pushed it right through, hoping nobody would notice, and another way to degrade and eventually destroy American culture.
How much does this have to do with the current administration? Would it have happened under a Republican administration like Trump?
Well, maybe so, but I think it would have to have been slower, more incremental. Because remember, all these people remain in their positions. And I think the bulk of that bureaucracy, including the National Park Service, the Department of the Interior, you name it, has become generally populated with leftists. And of course, this all started back in the 60s, 70s, the Long March through the institutions, take control of these. And then they're able to change the culture without any referendum from the people. William Penn, his statue there in Welcome Park on the site of his old house, slate roof house, I think it was, who founded, bequeathed to the colonies, Pennsylvania, which at the time was the most freedom-loving and welcoming of all the colonies. But that tells you something about the agenda of these people and this relentless drive to change everything in the past. This is right out of Mao's Little Red Book. He had his Red Guards target the olds. They just call it the olds. The old culture, the old customs, the old habits, the old ideas. They were all to be eradicated. And we're experiencing nothing less than that today in America.
I wonder if that William Penn owned slaves has anything to do with their point of taking it down. They don't mention it does, but I know that they have taken down Confederate leaders' statues in the past.
Well, and in a way, that's a brilliant tactic by the left to try to get everyone to focus on some flaw or foible on some American of 250 years ago, or even more recently, the Civil War, or any American founding father or hero. Because all of you human beings, we're all flawed. Then, too, you have to remember, it's easy to do this. Superimpose contemporary values and sensibilities over some character 250 years ago. So, through the education system, through art, through music, through entertainment, through Hollywood, it's a battle on all these fronts. And believe me, it has very little to do with how virtuous a particular historical figure was. It has all to do with destruction of Western civilization in general and American civilization in particular.
That was California-based historian Roger McGrath. And when we come back, computer hackers attack